If there's one thing I've learned from 3 decades of playing video games, it's that the future sucks. It's either a zombie apocalypse, uninhabitable hellscape, or filled with robots ruining everything. This doom and gloom trend continues with The Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human, a 2D shoot-'em-up that feels like a cross between Shadow of the Colossus and Super Metroid. And if that's not enough to get you excited, I'm here to tell you that it's one of the best games I've played in a long time. As the title suggests, you play the last human on Earth. He's an astronaut who was sent into a wormhole to find salvation for his dying planet. Unfortunately, he failed. After completing his mission, he returned to discover that thousands of years have passed and everybody on his once thriving planet has died. Worst of all, the mountains, cities, and skyscrapers have all been drowned by the out-of-control ocean. Of course, our hero isn't quite ready to accept his fate as Earth's last human. He uses his spaceship to navigate the underwater maze teeming with unexpected surprises. The stores, brands, and landmarks he once loved are gone, replaced by an ocean full of aggressive mutant fish. In order to survive his search, the last human will pick up power-ups and find items that will help him unlock new areas to explore and bosses to defeat. Much like Shadow of the Colossus, most of the game centers on these lengthy boss fights. The different encounters range in size, from small seahorses all the way up to a giant octopus. These are not easy battles, as most will require both memorization and a lot of patience. They all play out a little differently, giving us a wide variety of challenges to overcome. Perhaps my favorite boss is the anglerfish, an incredibly creepy skirmish at the very bottom of the sea. It's not only the bosses that are wonderfully varied, but also the world the game has created. Although it takes place entirely underwater, The Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human is spread across a number of beautiful locations. From the bright and colorful to the dark and gloomy, I loved every second of poking around the labyrinthian landscape and couldn't wait to see where it took me next. And I was not disappointed by the conclusion, which worked on a couple of levels. Although I called it a shoot-'em-up earlier in this review, The Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human takes a little while before it gets to the shooting. In fact, even when you finally get the harpoon gun, it's slow and has limited range. Eventually we're given missiles and harpoons on both sides of the ship, but that's only after hours of surviving the elements. Players going into this expecting a bullet hell style of shoot-'em-up will be disappointed, as this game's more interested in the exploration than all-out action. The deliberate pace, haunting atmosphere, and well-crafted story sucked me into this underwater world and wouldn't let me go. I was immediately won over by the throwback look and existential themes. I loved wrapping my head around the wildly different bosses, even when I wanted to throw my controller through the monitor. Speaking of which, The Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human is a lot more difficult than I expected. The game has a funny way of lulling you into a false sense of security before it ratchets up the difficulty. Because the battles are so long, some of the more challenging boss fights can veer into the frustrating. There were a couple of especially nasty fights that took way more than a dozen attempts to defeat, most of them with me yelling at the screen. But the anger quickly turned to satisfaction every time I took down one of the frustrating bosses. I also ran into a couple of navigation issues that slowed down the progress. It's not always clear where you're supposed to go next, since the game seems to give you no hints and the map is woefully inadequate. I found myself flying around in circles towards the end, something that stalled the otherwise swift pacing. Of course, this is a problem that finds its way into most Metroidvania-style action games, but it's made worse here by the limited map options. With its melancholy atmosphere, retro presentation, and intense boss fights, I found a lot to love in The Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human. I was immediately drawn into the underwater world and captivated by the hero's plight. If this is any indication of what's in store for 2016, then this is going to be one incredible year. Hi, thanks for watching the review. Remember a few days ago when I said there was not a whole lot coming out in January? Well, scratch that, because I suddenly have a half dozen brand new games to review over the next week. Expect a review of Echoes of Etheria on Friday, and The Deadly Tower of Monsters on Tuesday. I'm also taking a look at AIPD, Artificial Intelligence Police Department, and Between Me and the Night, and I'm pretty sure I've forgotten a few. All of this is coming up in the next week, so make sure and click the subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,